Hello guys, welcome to my new video. On this video I was going to be talking about BfA. What is it doing? I'm not gonna watch BfA stuff. Shadowlands is about to be released, but I wanted to give a last farewell to BfA and basically go through my ranking in terms of the dungeons that I enjoyed. Basically talking about BfA because it is going to go away very soon, and whether you hated it or liked it or you thought it was okay, let's have a look at BfA review. So we're going back to the tier list, guys, and this is going to be my tier list of BfA dungeons that I enjoy. And keep in mind, this is very important. I'm looking at pugs. I'm not looking at organized groups. I'm not looking at really, pushing the highest things with the players that you play for a really long time. I'm talking about joining a random pug and, what dungeon do you really like? What dungeon do I really enjoy playing with random people and I feel it's good or fun? And maybe it's interesting with certain affixes. So this is my tier list ranking for this, and I want to start off with probably my favorite dungeon. It's going to be Freehold, and this data is kind of backed up because Rated.io has this BfA review feature where you can see how many dungeons you did, and Freehold was my most popular dungeon to do. And there is multiple reasons about Freehold. Freehold is like an open space dungeon. It's relatively free in terms of how you want to approach it or the boss order that you want to do. And I feel that Freehold is one of my favorite dungeons. Now, I don't enjoy Freehold as a melee healer like a Paladin because boss 1 requires you to bait stuff. Then you have the shark boss and you can't really stay in melee all that time. So I don't really like Freehold as a melee healer. But Resto Shaman, I really like Resto Shaman. Because Resto Shaman with the versatility build can pump out so much damage, and Freehold is just so great for ranged, I feel. And Freehold is my favorite dungeon. Now the second dungeon that I'm going to put in like an A tier is probably going to be Atal. Again, in terms of the dungeons that I did, Atal was my second most run dungeon. The reason I don't put Atal higher because I think there's too much snapping. I don't like when a dungeon has or let's say the completion of a dungeon is so dependent on how well you can snap mobs. Not only tanks in really high keys need to snap and they always fall down or they might fall down, but as a healer, if you're doing like the left pack, you also have to go on edges. If you're doing the priestess boss, you also have to make sure maybe you're gonna stand on some ledge and cheese the bosses or cheese the ads, and I don't like that. But overall, I think Atal is great dungeon, especially because I consider Awakened affix to be one of the best affixes Blizzard created, like ever. In terms of fun, I think Reaping can be really fun. Reaping affix, in my eyes, was extremely fun if you played a class that was really good at AoE. If you played a class that was not good at AoE, you probably hated Reaping. So if you played Unholy DK, you probably really liked Reaping. And if you played like a balanced Druid whose Starfall is so memey, you probably didn't like Reaping. But Awakened, in my opinion, in terms of affixes, seasonal affixes, it not only creates new routes for dungeons like Atal. All of a sudden, a lot of people used to go left or used to go right. Now they might go left and things like that because of Awakened. It was an insanely good affix, so I have to always give a props to Awakened before talking about Mythic Plus dungeons and things like that. So Atal, too much snapping, but overall like an excellent dungeon with a lot of different routes, and I liked all the bosses and things like that. Now, I'm probably going to place Warcraft Manor in here as well. Now, Warcraft Manor, a lot of people might be like, what are you doing? Warcraft Manor has this concept of when you start a dungeon, different doors are going to be open and you're going to have a different path, which was extremely... It can really destroy your key in high keys because everyone wants to get the top left and the bottom right can be considered to be pretty memey, and Warcraft Manor is really terrible on things like Sanguine because of the small rooms. I love the aesthetics of Warcraft Manor. I really love the look and feel, the atmosphere of doing Warcraft Manor. I enjoy the bosses, they're very different. I do consider that Sanguine really makes this dungeon a pain. I do know that, but that's why I placed it in like an A tier, otherwise it would have been an S tier for me. Because I consider Warcraft Manor to be, thematically speaking, one of the most interesting dungeons. And honestly, there's something about it. I love to hear your opinions about Warcraft Manor. I really, really do. Now, in terms of B tier, there's going to be a whole lot of dungeons here. There's going to be a lot of dungeons. Now, I think I'm going to put Underrot here because I ran a lot of Underrot. Here because, and I feel it's a pretty easy key to time or to do well with pug scenarios. Tyrannical Underrot with Kragmaw is really annoying. So I don't usually run Underrot on Tyrannical because with pugs it's really, really hard. But I'm going to place Underrot in B. I didn't hate it, I didn't love it, I thought it was okay, I thought it was decent. I ran it a lot of times. I probably will place Temple of Satralis here as well. Now, Temple of Satralis was actually a dungeon that I really enjoyed, but the fact is, it's very linear. Like, the fact that if you don't have Shroud or if you don't have Awakened, you get so over the percentage needed for the dungeon, it makes no sense. And I really don't like that design, where Blizzard makes a linear design, and King's Rest is in a very similar way. And there are quite a few Shadowlands dungeons like this as well, where it's so linear, you can't skip anything, and if you don't have Shroud or any other way of skipping those mobs, you're gonna be over 100% by the end of the dungeon. It makes no sense to me, but I actually enjoyed Temple of Satralis in all the ways. I do feel that in Pogues, the first boss in Temple of Satralis is insanely hard for a lot of people, because you can get these crazy overlaps with multiple different abilities that can one-shot you to some extent, and I feel Temple of Satralis' first boss, especially in Tyrannical, is very easy to get one-shot in that, and people really didn't avoid the tornadoes well. So that's why I placed it in kind of a beat here in terms of my enjoyment. I'm gonna place Motherlode here as well. People might think I'm crazy. I actually enjoy Motherlode quite a bit. I feel Motherlode is one of those dungeons that on Tyrannical weeks, it's far easier or more interesting to do, especially because the first boss, as a healer, you get this DPS boost, and I love trying to beat the DPS classes as a healer, especially like Resto, Shaman, Lava Burst and things like that. It's very, very juicy. So I enjoy Motherlode, especially on Tyrannical week. I do feel the trash, there's too much trash in this and it's too long, but I think Motherlode could have been even better. It could have been a very fun dungeon, and I don't hate Motherlode. Again, might be a controversial opinion here. In terms of other dungeons in BT, I'm gonna put Mechagon here. Now, the reason I put Mechagon here, I actually enjoyed Junkyard a bit more. But Junkyard is a dungeon that I feel is way more fun in an organized group. If I were to rank this based on a really high pushing group, I would place it in maybe A tier or something along those lines. The reason is because you get these bots that give you different abilities. In Pug scenarios, it's kind of like free fall type of deal. You pick this, whatever. You don't know when you're going to get your bot as a healer or whatever. In an organized group, everyone is going to look at like the dungeon tools and they'll be like, hey, you get the first bot, you get the second bot, you get the third bot, you get the fourth bot. You know exactly what's going on. And I feel like running Junkyard with the Zap bot as a healer is really fun. And if you don't have it, you're like, oh no, this dungeon is ruined, my damage, I don't want to do it. So that's why I placed Junkyard in here based on Pug situations. Workshop, again, super linear dungeon. You can't really do a whole lot of different things. Bosses, like the first boss is a nightmare for things like Resto Shaman, where people are spread out and things like that. I don't hate it, but I really dislike the last boss. The last boss on Workshop has caused me a lot of issues in Pug scenarios. And I consider the second last boss, where you have to dodge the wrenches and things like that, and there's spinning things to dodge. I feel it's one of the, mechanically can be considered one of the hardest Tyrannical dungeons, because if you get hit once, you probably will die in a really high Tyrannical key. And I enjoy that, but again, in Pugs, it can be a bit of a hit and miss type of situation. Now, the dungeons that I kinda dislike doing, like all of the dungeons here, I am more than welcome to attempt or do or try and things like that. I'm more than welcome to do that. The dungeons that I don't really want to do, that I'm not really excited about, is C is going to be Shine the Storm. And Shine the Storm is because it is so long, it requires so many interrupts. That's the biggest issue with me. In Pug scenarios, it requires so many interrupts. As a Resto Shaman, you can carry because you're a healer that has an interrupt. But I feel like as a healer doing this dungeon, I feel helpless a lot of the times. Now, the last boss is a healer boss, where as a healer, you need to DPS. And I really like that. But at the same time, you have to rely on others to interrupt. And again, as a Pug, I really dislike this. In an organized group, this will be way higher. But like I mentioned, this is all about random groups. Now, in D tier, I'm going to go put King's Rest and Siege of Brass. There's nothing really that wrong about King's Rest, and people might like King's Rest. I just generally don't like the linear pattern of this. And I have really big nightmares. Really terrible nightmares about the third boss in King's Rest with the Severing Axe, or the Axe debuff that you get. It was nerfed so many different times. It just gave me nightmares, man. I know as a Holy Paladin you can bop and things like that, but if you play as other healer, it can be really, really annoying to deal with that, especially if you can't cast on the move, because you get this axis around you. Someone gets an axe debuff, they need to be healed like constantly. You need to constantly spam them, and if you have to move from the axis yourself, you're like, that's it, it's GG type of deal. So that's why I place King's Rest here, because something about it I don't really enjoy. Siege of Borealis, a lot of people don't even know this, because most of the high-end pushers play on Horde, and they don't even realize how bad Siege of Borealis is on the Alliance side, where you have to do this initial jump of skipping water, and if you stay in the water, the shark is gonna attack you and kill you. I think pretty much every single time I attempted that dungeon in a lower end pug, someone has died to that, and there's been multiple times when someone dies and just instantly leaves the group. Siege of Borealis on Alliance side, I almost would put it E tier, almost, but I don't feel it deserves to be E tier because it has one of the lowest completion rates on a lot of weeks as well. This is genuinely considered one of the hardest pug dungeons, and there's data to back this up. And Alliance side has it way worse, and you have a skip that a lot of people die to and leave a dungeon instantly, and this is why I hate Siege of Borealis a lot. Now, of course, Toledo Gore, there is not a lot of doubt here. There's not a lot of discussion here in terms of why I place Toledo Gore here. I think Toledo Gore is probably one of the worst dungeons they ever created or designed, and a lot of it is to do with how close every mob is located. They're just too close to each other. First of all, in terms of the way that the health frame add-ons deal with it, it's really terrible. You know, when someone actually creates a weak core to deal with the insane amount of enemy nameplate showing up to reduce that number, that there's actually a problem with the dungeon design. The mobs are far too close to each other. Things can put, like, imagine the amount of corruptions that you have, or effects that do these random damage effects. Twilight Devastation in Toledo Gore is like super memes, where you can do the last boss, you can get Twilight Devastation proc, and you're pulling everyone from the downstairs floor, where you have to make sure. Honestly, running Toledo Gore with Twilight Devastation is actually an extra Mythic plus affix, where you have to make sure you're never going to face any wall in case Twilight Devastation is going to proc. You have to make sure. Sometimes you can't help it, it's just gonna pull no matter what. The only bit of Toledo Gore that I really like is the open bit, the very entrance of Toledo Gore, where you pull huge crabs, you pull all the alligators and all that thing, and sometimes you might go on the first boss. I like that bit, but the second you go into the sewers, it's over for me. And Toledo Gore, honestly, it needs to be redesigned, it needs to be changed. My intention with this video was to also include things like raid bosses and go over them, but I don't want the video to be too long. I kind of want to know your opinion. Should I do another video in terms of ranking my most fun raid bosses and things like that? Leave a comment below if you'd like to see it. I'm gonna end the video right now, because I feel this gives a decent indication of what dungeons I enjoyed. If I were to summarize BfA dungeons overall, I would have to say that I definitely preferred Legion dungeons. I think in Legion, a lot of the dungeons I actually liked and I would really queue up for. And in BfA, I think there's decent amount of dungeons that I would actively avoid or never do. Like, for example, I really did not attempt a lot of these here. Again, Toledo Gore, if you look at my data in terms of the dungeons, Toledo Gore has, okay, Shrine is here, Siege of Borealis is here, King's Rest is here, and my Toledo Gore is quite high. But I really hated this dungeon in terms of everything. Again, my least done dungeons are Mechagon and Workshop, but that's understandable because they were added way later throughout the expansion. So I feel this ranking is a indication of what I enjoyed. I'd love to see your ranking. Let me know what is your favorite BfA dungeon, and let me know if I should do a video for raid bosses in BfA. Thank you guys, and I'll see you in my next video.